Hi, everyone. Alex here, and I'm the librarian for critical media practices. So I'm going to be talking in this video about how to build good research questions, how to break those research questions down into researchable segments, and then eventually how to turn that research question and the information you find into an original thesis. So a little bit about making a good research question. So good research question often starts with sort of how or why, right? And this means they're sort of meatier questions. They're not like, did this thing happen? Because that's like a yes or no question, right? And you're not going to write much of a paper if the answer is just yes, that was the answer, right? Or like they shouldn't be like, what was this made out of, right? Because you can just find that out. It's just so it's not usually just gathering some facts. It's actually when you suspect there's some kind of connection or meaning or an interpretation that you can make of your subject, of your artwork, the thing you're working on, right? And they're going to require you to do some analysis, some synthesis of information that you're gathering from different places, maybe comparison between two things, and some critical thinking, right? So they're not things you can just go and find the answers for. They're going to be things where you have to get pieces of evidence and gather parts of the research and bring that all together in order to answer the question. Ideally, they matter to you, like you actually care about finding out the answer, you're interested in it. And that's going to make your audience, your TAs, your teacher, a lot more interested. If you're invested, they're going to be invested in what the answer is and what you come up with. You're going to really want to make sure that they're specific and not too broad, right? So I think sometimes when people think they have to write an original thesis, they want to make this sort of grand overarching statement about art and how it affects current society and all through time, right? You just can't do that in a short paper, right? You can't even do that in a book, right? So you really need to make sure that they are narrow and they're focused. So maybe they're a specific interpretation of a specific work of art, or a specific comparison of two works of art, or a specific application of ideas into a certain genre or something like that. And you can start a little broader, but your aim is going to be to focus and to narrow as you do research. And the other, I think, really important part, and this is just generally, I think, good practice when you're doing research, is your question shouldn't have a predetermined outcome or answer. So we probably have all done it, or know people who have written the whole paper and then they go and find their citations afterwards, right? That's just really bad practice because, right, you're trying to find evidence to support your predetermined point of view, right? Instead of letting the evidence and the information drive your conclusions, right? And not only is that bad in academic research, it's also just bad life practice, right? You want to be able to do high quality scholarly research and see where that information is actually driving you and seeing where that's leading you to the answer that you're going to come up with to your question. Okay, so once you have a question, you're going to want to determine what you actually need to research to answer that question, right? You need to determine what you're going to need to know. Right, and you're going to want to then break down your question into researchable chunks. So things that you can research, right? If you can research your entire question and you just find one article that like answers your question, you may need to ask a slightly different question, right? Because your question's already been answered. It's already done. That's actually not great if you find the perfect source that says everything you wanted to say, right? Because part of an original thesis is there's something that you're adding. There's an argument that you're making, right? So think about the pieces that you're going to need, the pieces of evidence that you're going to need to string into to answer your question, right? You're going to go and gather that evidence and information. And then in your paper, you synthesize those pieces of information, right? So you can sort of find some information about this, some information about this area, and you bring them together. And your argument or your thesis is what connects those things. So finally, when you go to actually write your final paper, you're going to create a thesis, right? And this should answer your research question. And that's why having a good research question can set you up for writing a really good paper. It's because if you manage to answer your good question, you're going to have a good thesis. A thesis doesn't just report information that you found. So sort of like what we've been saying, right? It's not just going and finding information and reporting and regurgitating that back. It's actually creating new knowledge, new interpretations, finding new meaning, or new connections, right? It actually creates that through its argument, through its thesis, right? And that's why you have to find different pieces of information that you're bringing together. And so it argues for this original interpretation, this original idea you have, and it supports that assertions with evidence, both from your research as well as sort of visual or analysis of the work of art or media that you're examining. Thanks, and good luck with your research questions.